you have questions, please feel free to raise them. But I was asked to speak about, how do groups go about forming a neighborhood association? And I think some of you probably represent neighborhood associations that are already in existence, right?
Right.
And some of you are perhaps thinking about forming one or bringing one back to life. But the first step really is to gather people together. It can be you and your neighbors, the people who live in the same area, and think about what area you want to cover, a geographic area. I always say that the planning department would not like to hear me say this, but you can decide what boundaries your organization wants to cover. You don't have to go by what the city says on a map is your neighborhood. You can decide what area you want to cover. And then the next step would be to write bylaws. And I don't know how many people are familiar with that type of document called bylaws, but it's an internal document that sets how you're going to govern your organization. So who gets to be a member, and what does that mean to be a member? Usually for community associations, it's people who live within the boundaries and maybe who pay some dues, something like that. Most groups probably require the payment of dues, even if it's very small, some sort of affirmative step to join the organization. Some groups have businesses or institutions, faith-based institutions, schools, other organizations that might be in the neighborhood. You might want to have them as members as well. So that would be spelled out in your bylaws too. And your bylaws would also say how you're governed. So who leads your organization? And the typical structure for a nonprofit organization is that you have a board of directors, and that group of people collectively leads the organization. So within that group that's called the board of directors, you have officers, and that's your president, your vice president, your secretary, your treasurer. Those people have certain duties that they take on to help lead the organization. And then also in your bylaws, you spell out things like when you're going to have meetings and so on. Our goal at Community Law Center when we work with clients, like your organizations on bylaws, is to give you a document that everybody can read and understand, because I know a lot of lawyers like to write really complicated documents with language that other lawyers have a hard time reading. And bylaws are not going to work for a community organization run by volunteers if people don't understand what they say. So try to keep the language simple. Keep the document fairly short. You got to cover the basics, but it doesn't have to be too complicated. And also, we like that document to give you flexibility. So I mentioned things like, say how often you're going to meet. I don't mean that you're going to meet on the second Tuesday of the month at 7 o'clock at C.C. Jackson Recreation Center, whatever today is. Whatever. To be that specific. But to say you're going to meet monthly, or at least 6 times a year, or something like that, but not to get too bogged down into the details. Because what happens is, if you ever decide to change that, then you're not following your bylaws. And you have to go back and change your bylaws, and that's, it's too cumbersome. So give yourself some flexibility. Those are really the key steps in forming an organization. And any nonprofit organization should have a good set of bylaws in place. And that's something that organizations should be reviewing on a regular basis, maybe every few years. The leadership should pull out those bylaws. They should be looking at them regularly anyways, but saying, is this working for us? Is there anything that we need to change? Now, some groups decide to take the next step, which is to incorporate, and that's to form a legal entity with the state that can do business, meaning it can enter into agreements, it can open a bank account, things like that. The main benefit of incorporating in terms of how the organization functions is that it creates a separate being that then takes on the liability of the organization. If you're not incorporated, you are a group of individuals sitting around a table, and you could each have some liability risk. So that's something to have a conversation with a lawyer about, to get into that detail a little bit more. And then the last step that a lot of groups take is to apply for 501c3 status. That's the Charitable Recognition from the IRS. That's a big fundraising tool for organizations. If you're applying for grants, usually you have to be a 501c3 organization. It also comes along with some restrictions, like the organization cannot support or oppose any campaign. That's a big restriction. So you as individuals can do whatever you want in that, but you can't say, you know, this organization endorses so-and-so for mayor. So that's a very quick overview. I have a handout here that is a general checklist for starting a nonprofit. Okay, it goes into a little bit more detail than what I talked about. You can leave any extras here. With folks.
I have a question for
Yes,
you.
yes.
When you were talking, you said nonprofit.
Excuse me, everybody speak up, everybody can hear, please, speak up just a little bit.
Oh, okay. You mentioned nonprofit, so you're saying that you have a community, association is recommended to also be a nonprofit?
Yes, generally that's the structure that a community association takes. What nonprofit means is that any money that is raised by the organization stays within the organization and is used by the organization, and that no individual is profiting from it. So when you have a business, a for-profit business, if there's extra money at the end of the year, then the shareholders, or the owners, get to take it.
Oh,
But with a
really?
nonprofit structure, the money stays within the organization. And so
Oh,
that
okay.
is usually the structure that a community association takes because nobody actually owns it.
Okay.
It's a group effort. Any other questions on my brief overview?
I have a question.
Yes.
What's our organization, Neighborhoods United? We're more or less an umbrella organization, so everybody know that, and we got a lot of different 501c3s and neighborhood associations under our umbrella. It's very, very important, if you do have a neighborhood association, you want to get one, that you carry insurance. Because what has happened lately over the years, you have known what has happened, you know, kids in moon bounces and kids choking off of hot dogs and, you know, get food poisoning and all that kind of, the first person they're gonna sue is you. Not only may they sue the, neighborhood association, they may sue you personally. So with Neighborhoods United, if you become a member of us, we do offer you insurance to carry with your neighborhood association, so you be covered.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, liability risks run with, it depends on what your activities are. If you're a group that simply gathers together once a month to talk about things, that's one thing, but if you're holding events where somebody could get injured, that's another story, and you're right. If somebody even trips and falls at one of your events, like total accident, you know, but they've got a $20,000 medical bill, they're gonna be looking for help with that. I also wanted to share with everybody that we put on a workshop series for leaders of community associations. This is here. And I just started one last night. That'll go over the next couple months. But I had such a lot of interest in it that we've added a second one that'll be starting in April. So that's, the information is there. Basically, we go over the things I just talked about, bylaws, incorporating 501c3 status, but also some other more practical issues, like how to run a meeting, how to take meeting minutes, how to hold a vote on things. We found that a lot of associations, you know, you're all there because you care about your neighborhood and you want to do the best things you can for your neighborhood, but you don't necessarily know how to do things like how to run a meeting or how to take minutes and how to have a, you know, how to keep your records and things like that. So we go over that type of information, and Ms. Eaton over here is one of my graduates of this series, so I don't know if she'd say that's a good thing or not, but I think you liked it.
Yes, I love it.
So anyways, it's a 5-part series. We meet on 5. This one will be on Tuesday evenings, every other week, or I guess a lot of weeks. And we limit it to about 14 registrants, partly because that's how many people fit in our meeting room, but partly because we found that's a good number. We really get to have some good conversations and information sharing from groups all across the city. You know, y'all might come from very different neighborhoods and think that you've got different problems, but there's a whole lot of overlap in terms of the challenges that neighborhoods face, and, you know, good ideas to share in terms of how to solve some of those problems or how to find the resources. So, any questions about that?
Y'all better ask some questions, y'all be calling my phone, Mr. What about this? And she's here to ask some questions.
Yeah, and my phone number and email address is on that workshop is a nonprofit law firm. This is our 31st year working in Baltimore, and so we have lawyers on staff, just a few of us, and then a large network of pro bono attorneys who volunteer with us. And what we do is provide legal assistance to organizations just like yours, nonprofits, any type of nonprofit, including community groups that cannot afford to pay for legal services, which is most nonprofits. Market rate for lawyers in Baltimore is about $350 an hour right now, which is just beyond what most nonprofits can even fathom paying. So we are there to provide that help, so whatever legal problem you have, give us a call and we will try to help you out. We do charge an application fee per issue. It's generally $100, but we will work with you on that. And then after that, there's no charge for the services of the attorney.
And she has been quite helpful to Park Lane. We've not met personally, but we have certainly talked on the phone and email. So you have been very, very helpful to us.
Yeah.
So we're looking to see you tomorrow night, so that's why I'm not asking any questions today.
The other thing, we can talk about one other thing that I know we get a lot of questions to ask. Can you speak about the EIN number?
Sure.
Okay.
The EIN, that acronym stands for Employer Identification Number, which I think in and of itself is confusing because you do not need to be an employer to get one of these numbers. It's basically like a social security number, but for an organization. And it's basically the IRS's way of knowing who you are. It's usually assigned after you've incorporated, although I know some groups get it before then. But you need that number to file any documents on behalf of the organization with the federal government, to open a bank account, and things like that. Does that help?
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask a lot of questions. Another thing, you need to go down to the State Department and get your name registered. Because there has been problems in the past with neighborhood associations or anything. Some of them may be named, like say, what's this building, C.C. Jackson Neighborhood Association. And if you don't get that name registered, someone comes along a year later, and they wanna be called C.C. Jackson Neighborhood Association. And if your name is not registered, they look through the state record, your name is not registered, they're gonna take your name. So there's a lot of that involvement, not that they're doing it on purpose, but your name has to be registered with the state. And that way it protects you from anybody else, taking your name. And, you do a whole lot of work to build up your reputation, then somebody comes and you have a residence, somebody comes and take your name, then here you go again.
And there are two ways to register the name. One is if you form your entity, your corporation, that registers your name. But secondly, if you're not ready to take that step, that you want to make sure nobody else comes in and takes that name, you can file what's called a trade name registration with the state. That gives you the ownership of that name so that nobody else can take it.
And that EIN number is necessary if you are going to apply for any type of grant.
Sure.
Grant writers will require that in order for them to even consider your application, you have to be a viable association. And with that name being registered and with that EIN number, because if you are selected to receive proceeds from a grant, they want to deposit it into that bank account. So therefore, all of that has to be established with your officers' names or however you decide to set it up as to who has access to that account. But so it's important. So if you plan on doing anything in the community, do it the right way, as opposed to just saying, IR Neighborhood Association. It makes sense to go through the formality.
And I have a document that I could share with anyone that explains how to apply for the EIN. It's done online, but it asks some questions that are not necessarily straightforward, as is the case with most things from the IRS. They sort of speak a different version of the English language, the IRS, with all these, accounting and technical terms. But so if anybody needs help with that, just contact me and I can send you a quick little handout